the way with your finger, like that. Easily pull it out of the way. It's broken up by the sidewall. I do not want all this stuff packed. And you can see that this is a row with the Thompson wheels. It's kind of broken that sidewall off, disintegrated it, so it's hard to see. We get down here, and there's the seed stuck in the bottom. And that seed is thoroughly embedded. You would have to pry it out. There's no doubt whatsoever that it's embedded. That's something we're trying to achieve with the Keaton. You don't want to use your imagination that it's firmed. I want it securely firmed in there. And if you're planting an oilseed crop like soybeans, it better really be in there. In fact, Tom has a saying that for soybeans, he doesn't plant to the moisture line, he plants an inch under. Because soybeans have to draw so much more moisture in relation to the seed weight than corn does, or any grass crop, that you better be in darn near mud with that soybean, or they're not going to make a stand. And we're down in Oklahoma with higher temperatures and wind and so forth, even no-till, it can be a problem. So that's what we're looking for. Seed securely embedded. It's at the right depth. I'll find the whole soil line here. Right there. Second knuckle on me is 2 inches. And
I will say this, where you have the loose dirt on top, you can go deeper because it doesn't need near as much energy to come up through that than it does whenever you're trying to apply all of your down pressure from the top with the standard rubber closing wheels. You start putting that much pressure trying to get some seed to soil contact down in the bottom, that is a really aggressive, tough environment for a soybean to come up with. Loose dirt, I'd rather have loose dirt on top and 3 inches deep than an inch and a half deep and just pack the hell out of the top of it with the regular closing.
What about wicking or with the straw down?
they're loose. Loose soil will wick moisture out, or it will dry out quicker than packed soil. But if you have good residue cover, it's not an issue. That's why you don't want to be just sort of close to moisture. You want to be in really good moisture.
What about pulling that residue back over?
Pulling the residue back over, well, that's why I don't want to move it in the first place, because it's hard to get it back over the row. And your slow closing wheels will pull it in a little bit, but just don't move it out of the row if at all possible. But if we were running today, we would set the row cleaners down, and you walk along here and you can see obviously it's hairpin. You don't really have to do any examination. Well, actually, it did cut fairly well, but it still shoved too much straw down in there. You can walk along here, you can see the different action. For instance, this is the Schlegel wheel right here. You can see the little chicken track marks it makes. It actually closed fairly well here. It's mellow enough.
But could it leave air pockets down there?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I was noticed that too, but I think that's how much hairpinning there was right there. See? The hairpin and the seed. So we needed more row cleaner action, probably needed more down pressure as well. So if you take out your data sheet, we can walk over here and look at the stand. You can pull plants up, look at whether there's any tomahawk rooting or whatnot. But the data really tell the tale. So when I'm doing these stand counts, it's not some subjective thing about whether that plant was big enough to count or not. I go through and count the leaves. And it's surprising that sometimes a small skinny plant or a little squatty one will be the same leaf stage as a great big one. So this is a very meticulous, long process, because I do a count on several hundred feet a row, and I count the leaf on each plant, and only if it's above, in this case, if it's above V4, 4 leaf, I should say. If it's 4 leaf, 4 true leaves, they got counted. And that that last leaf had to be more than half as long as the next leaf below it to count as V4. So it's not, there's not a lot of room to fudge numpers here. Plans here this morning to see whether there's tomahawk rooting. Not here. Farther down there, the soils were crappier, and I was finding some tomahawk rooting, especially in the OEM row, especially in the Dawn row, and to some extent in a few other rows. That's noted down here in all this fine print, which I encourage you to read. There's important information there. But just look, yeah. What's a tomahawk root? Tomahawk root is when the roots are growing down the direction of the row and not growing out equally in all directions. And that's why you need 2 spoke closing wheels, not just one. I don't want roots on just one side of the plant. I want them on all sides equally. Thank you for asking. So if we look here at the green on the far right on your sheet, row 1, smooth OEM, 67% for a 4-year average. Not exactly great compared to, we've got some 80s and 90s there. Like I said, almost anything. The first, those last few rows there are misadjusted. The closing wheels go down to that thick black line. So nothing is as bad as smooth OEM closing wheels. Get rid of the damn things. Somebody asked me, why don't we have the beveled cast in there? That's a good point. Basically, we don't have enough rows at times. We've done a lot of these on 12-row planters, and we run out of rows. And also, I just never see them in this part of the world. I know that they're really popular in the Corn Belt. They are kind of idiot-proof. You're never going to dig kernels out. They are better than the rubber tire. So I think I've now proven adequately that the rubber tire is wonderful. Why do you haven't done those? Next year we'll switch that to the beveled cast. I mean, it's still not going to be good. It'll be better than the smooth tire, but it's not going to be anywhere near as good as these others. Especially when you start looking at tomahawk rooting. Getting a stand is only half the battle. We've got to, the yield effects we're not measuring here. But if you have tomahawk rooting, due to too much packing of that sidewall, you're going to really kill your yields. Smooth wheel is going to result in more tomahawk rooting. A fat spoked wheel is also doing a lot of packing, not exactly helping you on tomahawk. I saw quite a bit of tomahawk rooting on the curb tine row. Long ago, I used to think the curb tine was probably an all right wheel, especially in pretty loose conditions. But the more I'm around it, it keeps looking worse and worse in the data all the time. And I now know that it's not a good wheel for loose conditions because it digs too much, which is really surprising because it's kind of a blunt object. But people, I got pictures from the Corn Belt where one row with turbotine, it dug all the seeds out, every one of them. It's just horrible. Perfect stands on each side. So I don't know. Deere sells them now, so of course it's got to be the right answer, right? Deere sells it? Yeah? Don't believe it. So the curb tine in here at 76, that is considerably better than smooth OEM, but still shy of some of the other spoke closing wheels. The Spader, Martin Spader wheels. Now early on, when I wasn't as detailed gathering, I didn't keep all this data from prior years. I did the stand count, but early on, there were times where the Martin Spader would beat the Thompson wheel in stands, and so I guess my opinion of it has improved over the years, whereas my opinion of the curb tine keeps going down. So the Martin Spader at 88%, it is just nipping at our heels of the Exapta Thompson wheel at 93, not far behind. I haven't run the statistics to know if that's significant or not at probability of 5%, but it might be, it might not be. Okay, we see the Schlegel wheel in here, drops back down. It's no better than the curb tine, and if we're taking this stuff to yield, it's probably worse because there's just a lot of tomahawk rooting. And I think if we continue to gather data on that, the Schlegel is just it's going to continue to decline. It's just not a good design. So then skip it down a couple of rows to row 8. Furrow cruisers at 80%. That's a 3-year average, which isn't exactly knocking my socks off. It's a ways behind the Spader and the Thompson wheels. And it doesn't penetrate the soil as well. The smokes are wide, so I don't think they're really the answer in this part of the world. The SI distributing fingertip performs fairly well. In fact, it's up there again. It's right there with the Spaders and not far behind the Thompson wheels. So it looks attractive. I think it does a little more tomahawk rooting. I think it probably gathers a little more mud, but I haven't answered all those questions yet. The Getter poly twisters, 88, those are 1-year data, and I'm not sure how good the data is because there had some malfunction down there and had some doubles and triples I was trying to compensate for. But it looks like it's in the running, at least based on 1 year of data. So then carrying on, we're past the closing wheels now. Row 13 had Case IH gauge tire, which is allowing more sidewall to bubble up. 98% at only 1 year. So, at least it looked good this year. Don't count on it always looking good. And we've had it in there in years past, but we ran very little pressure on it, which is what, the gurus in the Corn Belt would say. No pressure on the row unit. Put those Case gauge tires on there, Martin Spaders, you got it all solved. Well, just to prove how silly it was to run no down pressure, here you can look down at the very bottom row of the text there. Past years, CIH gauge tires with low downforce setting average 65%. That's pretty damn bad. That's only 2/3 of a stand. The rows with John Deere gauge wheels and low downforce average 61%. So I don't know. It's 3 years worth of data. I don't know that you can separate those out. I guess the point is, at least in those data, the Case IH gauge tires weren't disastrous, but I've seen them in the field where they are disastrous, letting way too much sidewall blow out. And the seat placement's just terrible. And you stop and take them off and put the regular gauge tires on, everything's good again. Row 14, we're looking at a worn out guard, and sometimes this performs rather well. This year it performed very well, 91% of maximum. It was probably penetrating the soil a little bit better because what I talked about, the furrow is narrower, and we were struggling to cut a furrow, especially in these combine tracks out here. Long-term average though, 75%. I'm not very excited about that. So it is worse. Keep those guards up to spec. Row 15 had a good guard on it, but no mojo wire. So it's at 56%. That's absolutely the worst one in here. It's worse than running smooth OEM gauge tires. To me, I've long known this, but if in this part of the world, you have to have a mojo wire on the Keaton if you want good stands. It's just the way it is. Yeah, it's by product, but I think you talk to anybody and they tell you it's silly not to run them. And they keep the Keaton cleaner, keep the mud off of it. Okay, the last row, 16, everything was meant to be disastrous, everything's worn out, which actually I do see a fair amount of time. I roll up, look at the planter, and holy cow, things are in bad shape. These are usually farmers that are kind of on their last leg anyway, or they're cowboys and don't pay any attention, whatever. So the blade is worn off diameter, which at a 1/2 inch off, it's starting to get sharp again. You've got past the dull part, which half the bevel is there, that's maximum dullness. You get on past that, you start losing. Blades can wear differently. Sometimes you lose thickness faster than you lose diameter, and they'll get just razor sharp eventually. So that isn't necessarily disastrous. It depends on a lot of other things. Guard was worn out again. Gauge wheels had a bit of a gap. No mojo wire. What is actually should be the worst one on here, it's actually 72. It's not the worst. It was this year, it was the worst at 56%. But looking back through there are 2 years where it was absolutely the best stand out here. The reason for that is I'm counting plants that are above a certain growth stage, and if that row is going shallower, had some of the diameter was off the blades, the guard was worn out, so it was, a lot of times those seeds are only an inch or so deep. It happened to be a year where they were getting into moisture. Those came up quicker, even the late plants. So they had more of their late plants got included in the count. So it's just an aberration, really. If we took all this stuff to yield, that row would be the absolute worst one here because there's more variation in the timing the plants came up. Shallow seeding is no good whatsoever for corn. Need to be at least 2 inches deep. Any questions on that? Or you mean the spiraling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I dug it up. I didn't pull it up.
Okay. That's a good teaching moment. This fellow found one here where the mesocotyl, which is the part between the seed and the crown, the rest of the stalk, it's spiraled all around there. And usually one of 2 things occurred. Well, mostly one thing. That coleoptile was not finding a direct path upward. So there was a clod or something on it, caused it to dive off around and spiral and come up. And yes, we see that with the Thompson wheels. We see that with a lot of closing wheels out there. There can be a certain percentage that take a rather tortured path out. You see that a lot if you are running case gauge tires or don't have enough down pressure to keep the regular gauge tires on the ground at all times. You get a little bit of sidewall lift. That seed will bounce over into a little crevice under that sidewall, and then the coleoptile spiraling around trying to figure out, it's loose, it's in a little cave, and it's not understanding why it's so dense above it. It's spiraling around trying to get out. And so, we can see this with Martin spaders. We see it's a fairly common thing. Making it go away, I don't know how. I mean, I look at all these different things that are out there. I'm always thinking, how could we make a better closing wheel? We've got a few ideas to test, but it comes down to, I haven't figured out a better way to completely get rid of that, where you've got a little bit of chunking. Thompson wheel or whatever has shaved it off, and it's in a little chunk, and sometimes that coleoptile doesn't grow right off the slit between the chunks. Sometimes it dives off to the side. So perfection is difficult to achieve. Yes, sir.
I had a question back on the road cleaners. You said you'd run them here. Do you see people who run those with those depth bands on? Or are those necessary with the air, or what?
Okay, the question was on row cleaners, what about the depth bands, that wide treader piece that bolts on the front? Well, if you're using them as a depth band, you're going to be horribly disappointed, because that would mean you're going 3 inches deep with your fingers. That's a disaster. To use them to gauge how deep you're going through heavy residue, you would need a consistent mat of residue 2.5 inches deep all the way across the field to make them function as a depth band. So they really don't work well as a depth band. There's some little serrations. They might kick a little bit out. Mostly I just view them as kind of irrelevant. I mean, you can put them on there if you want. I think they're mostly decorations.
I agree. I agree. The only time that I really like them is, like I said, that very rare 1% of the time when I'm actually using row cleaners and I happen to go over a terrace, then they can keep you from gouging out the top of a terrace, I guess. Otherwise, it's a couple extra pounds of down pressure. That's what it is. Hang in there. That's about it.
about residue sensitive crops like canola or something? Are you a little more aggressive? Because you'll plant a little bit.
I don't plant canola, but the guys that do are using the shark teeth, and they're trying to actually, they're moving a significant amount, and then the little canola is right there in the bottom of the ditch, and their veins standing in water. You lose your stand.
Yeah, more sensitive crops we try to move a little more. It's always a judgment call. You know, what kind of terrain you're on. If it's flat, all right, we can move a little more. But if it's slow, that's always hazardous from an erosion standpoint.
In really heavy residue, I used my road cleaners this year planting hemp. It was like 10 days ago. I did use them there, and I used them fairly aggressive. But even at that, I still have at least an inch that's still there of residue because it was really heavy. I had 3 different scenarios I was trying. I tried oats and spring barley in a mix. I tried rye, all 4, and then I had some wheat that I planted as a cover and planted hemp in those 3 things. It's actually growing quite a bit better in the oats and spring barley right now. But it was all thick, heavy residue.
Any more questions on planters?
As far as coulters, do you see any situation where you'd like to have a coulter on the front of it?
Excellent question. I'd forgotten to talk about coulters. Paul even brought that up this morning. Paul Schaffer was saying with the STP blades, they like to run a coulter in front. Well, if that's a necessity, that's even more reason why I'm never going to run an STP blade, because I hate coulters with a passion.
I did too.
You can't go through mud with a coulter. It plugs everything up. They screw up your seed placement. There's nothing good that ever has come from running coulters in front of the row unit. You know, guys maybe in Pennsylvania or someplace where it's just they're farming a rock field, they'll say, well, you got to run coulters in there to protect the opener blades. I don't know, maybe. I'm not there. I mean, that might be an exception to the rule, but if it's just penetrating hard soil, no. You're just taking more force away from your opener blades, your true V blades, as Deere would call them. It's one more thing you got to force into the ground. Coulters are a band-aid to try to make a tillage-era row unit work again, because you're stirring up soil trying to make the old closing system work again. Fix that. Don't plaster a coulter in front and create even more problems for yourself. They destroy a lot more residue too.
A friend of mine does a lot of custom planting, a lot. He does tillage and no-till. So because he's out planting some tillage stuff, he's running Dawns, the Dawn curve pump. And he started really going big in this about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and it was early on no-till in our area, and everybody that thought of no-till thought of coulters. Because the drills have basically been conventional drills, and they put coulters in front of them and called it a no-till drill. So everybody in our area thought you had to have a coulter. He still runs them to this day. And he's kind of hard-headed, but the thing is, he says he has to run them so he can get his slot closed right. Well, change your closing system. It's not that hard to do. So he still runs them, claims his blades last longer, and I'm sure they do. But he certainly doesn't have stands that are even this good a lot of times. He really struggles with it, which is interesting because he has literally been a custom planter doing 10,000 plus acres a year for 15 years. Sometimes it's hard to change again. He's a real nice guy, and he still runs coulters. And he said that the only way he could get some of his planting jobs early on, he wouldn't have even hired him if he didn't have a coulter out in front of him. So he got more acres that way.
So, yeah, back in the Corn Belt in the 90s, you remember Lessiter's No-Till Farmer Conference. That whole thing in the mid to late 90s, it was all about coulters on your planter. How many waves are there? It's fluted, ripple, bubble, all this crap about it. You know, Dwayne Beck was in there, was like, get rid of the damn coulter. And from very early on, I saw with clients, get rid of the damn coulter. And now, finally, you know, those guys back there have caught on. There's the new till system now, which we were using long before Howard Martin or Ag Spectrum or anybody came up with that. That's exactly what we were doing. They gave it a fancy name, and now it's this big thing. Well, part of their system is get rid of the damn coulter. And so they're a little slow to catch on. They are from the Corn Belt, sorry. But, it's another case where Dwayne Beck was spot on. And I've just seen it over and over. I mean, he's exactly right. Coulters throw mud at you. They plant weed seeds. They're just making a mess out there.
Back there, rain covers a multitude of mess ups.
Exactly.
Have you done any work instead of the standard C2 with speed tube?
Okay, another good question. Have I done any work with speed tube or Deere's version, the brush belt, which is the Exapta merge? No, I don't have any clients running them, but I believe it when the guys say those are the most perfect stands ever. Now, part of that is with the Exapta merge, you automatically get individual hydraulic downforce with that. You can't buy it any other way, to my knowledge. So part of that advantage is hydraulic downforce is doing that. But there's still an advantage to those belt tubes. The reason is it's dropping the seed farther forward in relation to the blades. You have far less to contend with that sidewall wanting to come apart and get in there ahead of your seed. I mean, every seed is exactly where it should be with those. Whereas this, we did everything right. You're still going to find an occasional misplaced seed where a little bit of straw came up there and hit it and something went astray. There's going to be 5% or more, maybe 7 or 8% that are misplaced. But with those belt systems, that's not the case. Now, which one's better? I don't know. I'm intrigued with the speed tube. I think it might be a little narrower furrow, but I'm not sure about that. I need to do some precise measurements. The Deere, it does appear that they made the guard wider to accommodate their brush belt, and it makes the furrow harder to close. So
I tried a couple of rows this year with straight tubes, and Matt was nice enough to make me some seed tube protectors out of the same stuff he was making the rest of them to fit for a straight tube. It was a terrible year to test it because every time we planted we got 3 or 4 inches of rain. But where I really need to test something like that is on drier soils where you do have a lot of that drier dirt trying to fall in with your seed. I needed it really bad the year before planting into dry soils, shallow with cotton. And I tried everything I could trying to get that seed drop as far forward. I mean, running over 5 degrees nose up at times, trying to get that seed tube straightened out, just so I could drop it quicker and further forward. And I think that straight seed tubes would help quite a bit. This was just a really bad year to see any difference because it just always was raining. We'd get out and maybe run a day, and then boom, we'd get another big rain. So in my life of no-till, I've never had so many failed stands as I had this year. First 500 acres of cotton I planted was a complete failure. Less than 5% of a good crop. So it's all now cover crops and hand grass. Put cows on it. Mike loves it when I talk about running cattle.
It was an epic year for excess rain wrecking stands. Clients with fancy new technology, we wanted to see the difference, and didn't rain 6 inches and drown out half the stand and hide any differences in placement. It was whatever. All right, any more questions on planter stuff? Finish up something on planters. Tom was talking about a straight seed tube. Does everybody know what that was? I'm guessing no. Here's the standard Deere tube back here. It's curved. It's aiming the seed more back that way. The straight tube is more like this at the end. So that trajectory is more vertical rather than this way. So it's keeping more seeds in where they need to be. The problem with using those is we don't have a volume right now for them. And they're such an obscure thing. You know, most of you have probably never heard of them, didn't know they exist. You know, it's sometimes we get tired of trying to educate everybody. Well, you need a different seed tube with your volume. You need to go to straight seed tubes. Okay, choose which battles you fight, but it's something we might come out with if there's demand. Okay, moving on to drills then. Specifically gauge wheel drills. If you're trying to no-till with you know, basically a tillage era drill like Tom mentioned, you know, it's trying to do everything from this packer wheel trailing back, and it's not going to work in this part of the world. You know, you may get some stuff coming up behind the drill, but you go out and do the stand counts and it's not pretty. Your percent emergence is not very good. You know, so that everybody wants to run an aggressive coulter cart, coulters in front of that opener to make that ancient system work well again. Well, now you just buried all your residue. That's not very good either. So really, on you know, all the planters since the mid-70s have had gauge wheels alongside the blade. That's a valid concept. No planter manufacturer still has the ones trailing way back behind anymore. That went away. It needs to go away on drills. You need a gauge wheel alongside the blade to control sidewall blowout, to control depth where you're dropping the seed. Anything else is terribly inferior. So basically there's really only 3 of them out there. There's the Deere, which is very popular. There was the Case SDX, which it didn't do anything very well. I'm kind of glad it went away. There's no reason for it. I guess I am forgetting the old Flexicoil FSO. Kent and I are still traumatized by owning those. They did a great job seeding, you just couldn't keep them going. You work on it all week and take it out on Saturday like a race car, and, you know, then you're working on it all week again. And now Case has come out with the Precision 500, Precision Disc 500, which is also the New Holland P2080 and 2085. Basically what they did, Flexicoil, Case, they're all together. New Holland, Case New Holland owns the whole thing and have for some time. They went back and they took all the good parts off of the FSO where everything was located, and they fixed the stuff that was stupid. So it now holds together well, it's easier to work on, you know, it's a pretty decent opener. We'll talk more about this after lunch when I've got some slides in front of me. The downfalls, they don't have an in-furrow seed firm mechanism. So anyway, everybody out in the plains and most everywhere else has gone to the John Deere drills if you're a serious no-tiller. Even people that's the only piece of John Deere equipment on the place. It's one of these. They've gotten to be where they're kind of indispensable. You know, I've been saying for 30-some years, you know, we're going to get a better opener design someday. Well, still waiting. Deere changes things, and not necessarily for the better, but we get new model numbers and they keep selling new equipment. But they haven't made anything worse for a while, so I guess that's good. So it's basically half of a planter opener. It's got 1 blade, 1 gauge wheel instead of 2. It's never going to be as precise as a double disc opener because you're relying on that integrity of the sidewall to stay out of the seed furrow while you're trying to drop seeds. So it works well if you've got good structure. It works well if you've got some moisture where that blade can cut a clean furrow and it'll stay open. In really loose, dry conditions, this drill gets, you know, more marginal. It's not as pretty. Not pretty at all, in fact. So various improvements have occurred both from Deere and aftermarket over the years. We'll kind of start at the front of the opener. This big pin here and the bushings in it control this opener. You're trying to run this blade at 7 degrees. That's what it's engineered for. If you get too much wear in that pin up there, that blade is gradually straightening out. It's trying to run perfectly straight. That's where it wants to run. You have to have good enough bushings and pin to hold it at 7 degrees. So as that area wears, your furrow gets narrower and narrower. And your seed boot is such that the narrower the furrow gets, the more seed is going out on top of the ground instead of down in the furrow. That boot isn't below the ground most of the time. Also, your seed lock wheel isn't doing as good a job as that furrow gets narrow. Most of these don't fit down in there very well. So you're struggling there, and everything, even your closing is not tracking where it should. So kind of the first order of business, it's sort of like on the planter, we've got to have the row unit level. We've got to have these bushings up to spec. So those openers staying where it should. The next thing is we want good sharp opener blades. We want a nice deep bevel. Gradually, all the blade manufacturers have gone to a slightly deeper bevel. It's truly 3/4 of an inch now. It was a little bit shallower before. Osmondson may still be shallow, I don't know, but we gave up on them a long time ago. Their blades they had no sharpness to the edge at all. Deere used Osmondson up until a few years ago. They were not good blades at all. Easily the worst one out there. The Ingersoll Pelota, which is what Deere uses now, and the Fortescue New, much higher quality in terms of sharpness and depth of bevel. Again, we want to replace that bevel when half of it's gone. Because those blades are tremendously dull when half that bevel is gone. Get a new blade and hold it up to your old blade so you can see how much bevel is gone. People think there's still bevel there, but it's nothing like the new one compared to the new. In fact, in some cases the bevel is completely gone from this side and you're getting a little bit of rounding on the other side. People think that's the bevel. And they'll install the new blades backwards because they think that. Well, they've just worn the blade so long that you can't even tell which side the bevel is anymore. The bevel goes towards the boot side. So gauge wheels, same as with the planter, need to keep them on the ground. That's a big deal on these drills. I said on planters, springs, airbags versus springs, not that big a deal. It's nice to be rid of the springs, but it's not huge. The springs sort of function okay on a planter because it's a parallel link. Springs are engineered. You don't drop to zero pressure at any point in that range, nor does it double. It's probably 20-30% difference from top to bottom of its stroke, but it's not crazy like this. This drill with the OEM spring, you can press that spring about 2 inches, and due to the angles that the openers run at, you go down into a wheel track of a combine. It could have been perfectly dry out in the field. Lay a board across there. That combine track is an inch below the old soil line. You drop down in an inch, you've lost half your down pressure just when you needed it the most in that wheel track. The springs on these drills were always a joke. It is very poor design. If you're absolutely tabletop level and there's never a wheel track anywhere, it will be okay. Not in real world conditions. We've got all kinds of minor undulations out there, old disc ridges and little depressions here and there. Soil's moved around, wheel tracks especially. We can't keep those springs working right. So about 5 years ago, I started working on hydraulic downforce for these. It's like, that spring's got to go away. It's a simple, relatively simple matter to put a hydraulic system on there. Well, it took a little engineering. It wasn't quite as simple as I thought, but we got it worked out. So we've been on the market, I think about 4 years now on Uniforce. Kent's ran it a couple of years. Do you have any comments? I guess just 1 year.
That's correct. The other day we were building some cover crops out on the four-wheeler,
following the drill around. You cannot believe the travel that these row units get with the hydraulic system on there. Crossing a terrace, it looks like that cylinder ram is extending about 6 inches. And it'd be hard to get your spring to do much more than 2 or 3. We're just extremely pleased, and we wouldn't want to run a drill now, having run one with the hydraulic down pressure. We wouldn't want to run one without. Now, we can't speak to down pressure because we don't know what the individual row units are experiencing for down pressure, but we know that we're keeping that gauge tire on the ground through dips and over terraces and over humps. We really like it.
And were you at all skeptical going into Unifor's purchase?
This is one thing that you won't tell your wife about afterwards. You don't want to tell her before you write the check.
Kent was mighty reluctant to go with Uniforce between installation and just more headache and whatever. I don't know how long the cylinders last. We made them last a good long time. They're not ordinary cylinders. They've got extra packing rings in there. You know, I thought it would be just silly to make these so that they only last 5 years or even 10. You know, so hopefully they'll last well beyond 10 years before you even need to worry about packing rings. That's a hope. I have no proof. The system's been out. The very first ones we installed have been out 5 years. Everything's holding up fine. Tom ran half his drill with Uniforce this year. We're hoping to collect some data on it in terms of yield and that sort of thing. Any observations so far?
Well, I was probably even more skeptical because I haven't actually went out and bought it. He had to give me half my drill for the test. So I did run it. I was very excited about running it, and it's been amazing to watch it in the field. Like you said, you got to get out there and watch it, and it's amazing to travel. And what's amazing also in that travel is it has the exact same amount of down pressure at the end of its stroke as it does at the top of its stroke, and it's consistent all the way across. So you know how these drills don't like going over terraces very much. You'll have the end kind of come up as you go over. Well, we don't have to drill out our terraces. We don't have to go back and drill them out to make sure I don't have those skips, because the extra stroke that we have in these is enough, and it's absolutely amazing. You know, we've got some sloped fields. We don't have as much as they have here, but on some of those sloped fields, you get reels and stuff where a little water might be running down where one of these went, and then the next time you go through and plant it, you're not getting any down pressure, so you're not getting anything to grow in the bottom of those tracks. You know, especially going over terraces and stuff, because we want to be as efficient as we can. So I don't do a lot of contour stuff because I don't have a lot of hills anyway. So I just want to take the longest run in the field and get it planted quick. The problem with that is that sometimes you're going straight up and down a hill, and then the next year you've lost a little bit of soil there somewhere, and then you don't get anything planted. There's nothing growing in that to protect it. With the added stroke and the increased down pressure that you have now on the bottom of that little spots, now we're getting crops to grow where we couldn't get them to grow before. And you know, as we go to more and more management, where we're managing on a smaller and smaller size of management, like an acre. You know, we were doing 5-acre grids, 2.5-acre grids, even 1-acre grids. If you really get out and you look at every square foot, what's going on in that foot, this seed is too expensive not to have this and have every one of those square feet with an adequate number of plants. And it makes that big a difference. It really does. I told him right before we started this that I'm going to go ahead and buy the system that he put on there, and I'm going to do it on the whole thing. It made a believer out of me.
How many inches?
Well, we've got quite a bit more than the OEM spring for travel. We gave it 1 inch more. It's about 1.5 inches actually, more, let's see, it's supposed to 2. The opener hangs 1 inch lower on these. So you've got about 1.5 inches more total downstroke, but it's effective all the way through that. So the increased, you know, that spring relaxes the slightest little bit and you've lost effectiveness right away. So we've got about 2.5 to 3 inches more effective downstroke than Deere. we've also got more upstroke. Those spring coils eventually hit on that opener if you hit a big stump or whatever. These have got, I think, at least an inch, maybe a little more than that, upstroke. We just didn't want to damage anything, you know, when you do hit something you're not supposed to. So they've got a lot more stroke.
So you're 7 inches total.
Yeah, there's about 7 inches of rod sticking out there, 6.5, something like that. Yeah.
But I'll go.
Total. Oh, total. The opener's, yeah, less than that. So it's got, I don't know, 4 inches probably. Whereas the OEM's got maybe 2. We're probably shortchanging that a little bit because that angle changes going down. Yeah. The OEM might have 5 inches original. Obviously, I haven't measured this. The OEM might have 5 inches and we've got 8 or something. But we're effective all the way through that stroke. Yeah, the deal with Tom was we didn't give him half his uniforce. I knew he was very meticulous. Yeah, he was very meticulous and good at, I knew he would gather good data for us. We didn't realize everything was going to drown out this year, but eventually we hope to get some data out of that. My proposal to him was we'll come and install half uniforce on your drill, and a year later we either come and remove it or you can pay for it. And he's already told me, he said even before he ran it, he's probably going to end up with the whole thing. And now that he's ran it, he said, yeah, definitely need the whole thing.
This is unsolicited on Matt's part, but last fall we ran it in wheat for the first time. And I sent an email to Matt. I told him, I said, it reminds me of a planter. The seed placement is so good. I've never seen a drill do so well with seed placement. The depth was very consistent and uniform. And I thought that was pretty impressive, but of course you know how last fall was. It was late, wet, and cold. This spring we used the same drill for soybeans. And a seed salesman stopped by to check to see how our crops were doing here a couple months ago. And he said, I can't believe that these are drilled soybeans. He said they look like a planter.
Yeah, it's impressive. It's still not as precise as a planter, but it starts getting you ballpark close. Everybody, how many of you have heard of precision planting cedar force for these drills? A couple of you. Cedar force, there's 2 different systems under cedar force brand name. The low end one, either one of them, they measure the downforce on every single row. It's got a sensor, so you've got all that data. The low end version doesn't replace the OEM spring. It's just adjusting the rock shafts individually, how much torque is on. They're controlling each of those cylinders, twisting the rock shaft individually. Now this is a small advantage in terraces. Undoubtedly going over a terrace it helps, but for what it does, it really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's way more money than Uniforce and even that low end one, and you don't get rid of the damn spring, which is really the whole problem. So you've improved your cedar performance very, very, very slightly compared to putting the cylinders on. Now their premium system, they've got cylinders in all the rows just like this. Still using the rock shaft to raise lower like we are, and they're controlling each row. But as you might guess, that level of precision comes with a hefty price tag. It's about triple what Uniforce is. So I'm sure all of you want to talk prices. We've got more than 48 rows on here. I don't have those numbers in my head. 48 row Uniforce system is in the low 20,000 range. 48 row Cedar Force, the full blown deal, is in the low 70,000s. So we are developing right now, monitoring for all these rows, because even with springs, you really would like a monitor to know whether you have anywhere near enough pressure or not. You know, if those gauge wheels are lifting off half the time, you want to know. And so you could have sensors on just a few rows scattered across the rig, maybe one in the wheel track and one out in the wing and one somewhere else. Eventually you have pretty good data, because somewhere along the way, unless you're doing controlled traffic, you're going to be running through a combine track, sprayer track, whatever. After a few passes, you know what you're doing, and you can adjust your pressure, whether that's OEM compressing the spring, or uniforce. We're also eyeing, well, should we go the full distance? Should we make it automated and control each row? It's not that hard to do. You just need a valve on each cylinder and some software to control it. And you need return lines. That oil has to go somewhere from the valve. The question is, will people pay for it? And I had my doubts all along. And I asked Ken this in an email. He said, you know, would you go for a full-fledged system if we offered that, with the price tag? It's going to be way more than double what standard Uniforce was. And he said, no, you wouldn't. And the reason was exactly what I said earlier. This is never going to be as precise as a planter. And I think the phrase Kent used was lipstick on a pig. You know, trying to achieve that level of precision, the returns just aren't there. We're not going to make this into a planter, putting all that tech on there. And I thought the same thing. I thought, you know, precision planting is not going to be able to sell any of these high-dollar systems. And I didn't hear much about it. It had been out there for a year or two. But lo and behold, there are some being sold in some regions. And I talked to a guy who's, well, he actually farms our family land up in South Dakota. And he put it on. And there are a couple of reasons. He really liked, you know, what hydraulic downforce did for his planter, individual row control, automated. And so he kind of wanted that for the drill. And I asked him about the level of precision and all that, and he said, no, that really wasn't the reason for it. So his ability to go through mud. They have a very tight planting window in northern South Dakota. You know, you got to be able to plant corn, the whole farm, in 6 days. So that might be all you get. You might not even get 6 days this year. You know, it's just pell-mell. Everything has to function flawlessly in those conditions, and they're usually wet, often wet, and this year more than ever, it was ridiculously wet. You know, they've got open rim gauge wheels on the planter, on their drill. And he just told me, he said, you know, without that on the drill, we wouldn't have got done seeding this spring. Nowhere near on time anyway. He was the first one done in the region. And he farms a heck of a lot of acres for what he's got. So being able to release pressure off of those openers that are going into the soupy parts, I think there's a real advantage there for fully controlled hydraulic individual control downforce. But in this part of the world, usually we just wait and eventually it dries up and we can get it planted. We aren't pushed quite as hard. But you know, it remains to be seen whether the market is really ready for this, or if it's just sort of a, you know, it's a thing that we can do. We're capable of doing it, but I don't want to do it if nobody's going to buy it, or we're only going to sell 2 or 3 systems. Any questions on Uniforce? Sorry, this turned into a sales pitch almost. I did talk about precision planting for a while. Yeah.
What kind of hydraulic system does your tractor need to have in order to run that?
It doesn't take much. It takes 4 gallons per minute for 48 rows going through the field. So not a lot. You might bump up to 7 or 8 gallons when you raise or lower, something like that when you're initially charging. But if your situation is such that you are barely able to run your cart fan now, you don't want to put Uniforce on there. some of these older tractors, like the 8760, 8670, some of those Deere 4-wheel drives from the late 90s, their pump output wasn't much over 25 gallons per minute, and the fan takes all of that. I mean, we tested Uniforce on a drill, tried hooking it onto that tractor, and it would not run it. My conclusion was, he's barely able to turn that fan. He's totally maxed out. I mean, those cart fans do take almost all of 25 gallons per minute, which is all you can shove through a remote.
Put a PTO pump on?
Can you put a PTO pump on? Sure. All right. Moving on with the rest of the opener, gauge wheels, not a lot different than on the planter. You still need to get them shimmed up tight against the blade, and I noticed on this drill there's some of them with some really huge gaps, which is definitely affecting performance. They need to be adjusted just like the planter does. It's the same problem. You got to hold that sidewall together, particularly that duff. It's all, you know, stuff falling in the furrow ahead of the seed is far worse on this drill than it is on the planter, because that one side is completely open. You don't have double discs there. So as soon as that blade is cut through it, it's already starting wanting to fall in the furrow. All that duff and stuff. So the gauge wheel is in a good location on these as far as fore aft. They got that part right. So the seed delivery tube, it's now made out of steel because it's running in the soil a bit. And up until the Pro Series, that boot is wider than the furrow being cut. It's not in the shadow of the blade. Basically, that outer wall of the boot is hanging out past, which means that it's just about impossible to shove that boot below the soil surface unless you're in tilled soil. And no-till, you can't do it. So we don't even try. We just try to keep the bottom edge of that boot right at the soil line. Can't seem to do much more than that. Those boots do need to be maintained. The problem is, I got rid of mine. I don't know what I did with the one with the severe wear. Would you be so kind as to hold this? So, because it's hanging out past the shadow of the blade, the soil's wanting to scour this away right here. And eventually that will wear up into an arc. And your seed placement gets a lot worse when that happens, because that's kind of what keeps this duff and dust out of the furrow. It's pushing it away. So this needs to be straight across here. And you can kind of look at this, you know, the notching will occur here. How much thickness do you have right here is an indication of where they're going to cause a problem. And always look in the tire and the tractor and cart tracks, because that's where the wear is the worst. Incidentally, when you're looking for slop in, like this main pin, check them out here on the outer rows, because you make a little bit of you follow the contour, go around the corner of the field. These are the ones that get all the leverage on them. And the same is true on all these pivot points. The pivot point on the closing. We want that. I'm not overly fussed about the pivot point on the closing, but you do want it somewhat tight to keep that tracking properly. The pivot point on the firming wheel we don't really care about. It's got to find the furrow. It's got to stay in there. It's not a big deal. Now back here on the boots, hold this one alongside that. These two, the one on top of that one. Okay, so the 60 series was a disaster on the seed boot. Actually, if you hold the mounting points, so they're sort of side by side, if they moved the boot about 3/4 of an inch farther forward, and they made it a whole bunch thicker. It's like, oh, it wears out there, so we'll make it thicker, right? We solved that, perfect. And they moved it forward, so now it's bulldozing even harder in the soil. And even worse, they made this internal channel so that is directing seed over onto the blade. And the blade promptly just flings the seed right out of the furrow. So if you've got a 60 series drill that hasn't been upgraded to 90 series boots, do it. I don't think you're going to regret that. So now we've got the Pro Series boot out there. With the 6090. So they are listening a little bit. Everybody's like, you know, why is their boot so wide? We want to make it. You see how much narrower that is. So Deere's listening. They're trying to make it right. And these, you know, it's going to be beautiful as far as staying down, or you know, not bulldozing the sidewall. You can run it, you know, in a lower notch perhaps, and do a better job keeping stuff out of there, because it does stay in the shadow of the blade. The concern I have is this throat now is so narrow that they're going to plug a lot. We already have enough trouble plugging these others. Maybe not so much on the CCS drills, but once you start running dry fertilizer through there, there's always some chunk somewhere that ends up and it goes through the whole system and then lodges somewhere in the secondary, or most likely in this boot, and then it fills up with seed, and then you spend 45 minutes with the wire trying to poke it out of there. I also think that Pro Series boot is going to be an issue for planting oats. I don't have any proof, but I just don't see how that's going to work. And the same is true with garbanzo beans. I don't think they're going to be able to shove them through there. So I like the idea of a narrower boot, but I think it may cause a lot of headache. We just don't have enough acres out there to really know anything. On the topic of boot, there's this flap that goes on the trailing end. Deere always had this flimsy piece of white material that either wore out really quickly or got bent up and out of position. And Needham decided to make it a whole lot thicker, so at least it doesn't get bent out of position so easily. Made it a little bit longer. Overall, pretty good improvement on OEM, and now, in fact, the Pro Series boot has a seed flap that looks pretty much exactly like Needham's, and it's made out of this rigid material. The thing about, I'll put that back in there and turn it this way so you can see. Alright, take your fingers out there. The thing that happens, especially with that white flap, but even with the thicker flaps, is that when you're running, and longer they are, the worse this is, when you're running in the soil, they'll be running on the sidewall a little bit, and they lift up, and they create this gap here that seeds can get out. Because there's nothing, you know, you're just trying to get all the seeds rattled down there. It's kind of chaos. But this little triangular juncture here is not good. In fact, if your boot's a little bit above the soil line, seeds can get out here, but this triangular gap back here is an even bigger disaster. Right there. So,
especially when you're running with a lot of air. You have air escaping through there, and it carries seed with it.
So I had experience with the Flexicoil FSO, and they had a nice soft rubbery flap in there, and it was oriented almost vertically, like the same direction the seed tube was. And it did a great job of getting those seeds tickled down in there and keeping them down there from blowing out. I mean, the seed placement with the FSO was pretty darn good, and it's the same way with the Case P500. So I was like, all right, why are we making this out of rigid plastic? This makes no sense. It wants to ride on the sidewall and pull out. I'm going to make it out of a flexible material. And then I made this 20-degree angle on it because I want to close that triangular gap. In fact, I even want to close off part of this area down here where the gap could occur. In other words, I'm making a curtain there and keeping that seed directed farther forward in relation to the blade and less chance of escaping out that little gap under here if there is one. These have been our #1 seller for drill items. We sell these by the tens of thousands, and I don't think I've ever heard anybody be disappointed with them, other than Phil Needham. It worked out way better than I thought I was onto something, but it's proved out very well. Needham's argument is, well, these are, what does he call them, floppy or something like that they bend up out of the way. Well, the only reason they're going to bend up out of the way is if you got straw in the furrow. You're hairpinning. So, don't let it hairpin and you won't have anything pulling this up too far. And what I think they work. Seed placement to me is considerably better. Seed firming wheels are another thing that they've gone through a lot of iterations over the years. The very first ones Deere used was the same rubber tire closing wheel off the planter on the very first 750s. Those didn't go into the ground at all unless it was tilled. So after a few thousand drills, they came up with one that was a little bit narrower, a little bit more appropriate. It's still an inch wide, it's on a rigid steel rim. These would wear so hard, rub so hard on the sidewall that this rim disintegrates, it just disappears after a while. You got to replace it. And of course, the rubber in the tire, it would get pared down pretty quickly. But I found in Kansas, by the third year of no-till, there are times where this wasn't even touching the seed, the bottom of the furrow. You've got a roughly V-shaped furrow, and this is riding up here on the sidewall. It's 3/4 to an inch from even touching the seed. It was a joke. So, one of the best things that ever happened to that drill was the Case SDX came along. Like I said, the opener didn't do anything very well, but they had a heck of a nice firming wheel. So we started putting these on the Deere drills in 2001. These are a little over 5/8 of an inch wide, and they flex. So they'll follow the furrow. They also get narrower up here instead of staying thick like that. So you're not rubbing on the sidewall with this big thick rim. So these, again, once we put these on the Deere drills, we cut our seeding rates probably by 25%. It was just doing that much better of a job, maybe 30%, 35% in cases. It was like the mojo wire on the planter. That seed firming down in the furrow is absolutely the most critical thing you do. I had one Pioneer agronomist tell me once, he said, that Keaton and mojo, that's the most important part of the planter. You can take the seed tube away, but I got to have a Keaton and mojo. And he's exactly right. Nothing is going to grow without either a rain or being firm down in the bottom of that furrow. So somewhere back in there, both Needham and Deere came to me in about 2004 or 5, because I was making a lot of noise about putting STX wheels on there. They wanted my help designing firming wheels. Well, Needham pretty much had his designed already, and I think he just wanted me to agree that it was great. I told him, no, it's not great. It's too damn wide. It's on a steel rim. So I sketched up what I thought it should be, and a year or two later, that was V6, they called that. A couple years later, he came out with a V8, which we shrunk the rim, so now we can flex and follow the furrow. We don't have this big wide rim that's riding on the sidewall. Much, much superior to his previous one and to Deere, which was still the wide one at the time. Then we came out with the Duralox, and apparently Needham thought that was so great that he had to have a urethane wheel now too. So he still calls it a V8, but it's a urethane wheel. It flexes pretty well, but it's wide, a bit wider than it needs to be. Not catastrophically wide, but I think most of the time our Duralox, being narrower, has an advantage. He does have a double row bearing in there, which the bearing is going to last forever. Our Duralock uses the exact same bearing that Deere uses in theirs, which It's not going to last forever, but usually they last long enough. Usually the rest of the wheel's pretty well disintegrated or getting pretty close. And do you have a lot of problem with these bearings? No. They're not great, but they're not, you know, because it's a single row bearing. It's never going to be as great as a double row in terms of being able to handle cycle. So Deere came out with theirs, based partly on my feedback. They got a nice narrow edge to it, which they're listening, but they've got a rigid plastic rim up here. So unless you're running perfectly straight, this wants to ride up on the sidewall, not stay down in there. Unlike these flexible wheels that they won't get hung up on the sidewall. So vast improvement with Deere's latest with their firming wheel. Now on the Pro Series, they have a firming wheel that is essentially identical to Needham's old one. In fact, the parts are interchangeable. Needham's not making it for Deere, they ripped them off. But it's the urethane, flexible urethane on the outer part, double row bearing in there. No, wait, that's not urethane. This is a rubber. Sorry, my bad. So the new Deere is this flexible rubbery compound, not urethane. So that was a problem with the Needham V8 of this vintage. Was this rubbery ring would sometimes tear out of the hub, especially on wider drills going around a corner. It just popped that thing right off of there, and they didn't wear very well. And so right now, Deere's latest and greatest is still a step behind because they're not urethane. They're a rubber tire wheel. So another nice thing about urethane is if you're in really, really marginal conditions, which sometimes we are, seed and milo, seed and wheat, you're just kind of barely getting the moisture and you can't go any deeper. You need a lot of seed firming, but the soil's kind of dry and it's hard to get that firming. In those really tough conditions, the seed will actually indent this rubber tire rather than the tire fully pushing the seed down in there. There's a little cushion there, and it results in less seed firming. Whereas harder urethane runs over that seed, it has to go down in the furrow. So we're getting a little better firming out of the urethane, vastly longer wear life. I wouldn't be surprised if Deere changed soon. They know what was good for them. So after all these iterations, and I'm really frustrated with everything, SDX jacked the price, Case jacked the price up in the SDX to 100 and some a wheel. You know, we just weren't getting the really wonderful firming wheel. To me, it was not that hard. So eventually, I get frustrated enough and decide, well, I guess I got to do it myself. So a few years ago, we started testing things with the Duralock. We actually started with the narrowest possible design that I thought would even work. It's easier to keep making the mold wider. You can't go the other direction. So we'll start with extremely narrow wheel. We thought, well, we'll keep widening it out till we're satisfied. Well, it works so well at this dimension, which is about 0.45 inches, that we kept it. I mean, I've had my crew out there, and we're all assigned to dig different rows, and I don't tell them which row is what, and they tell me which one the seed firming is better. It's better with this one than with anything else. So I think the firming is better. It's not quite as flexible as Needham's, but it flexes enough. It flexes, you know, at least as much as the SDX. It's enough to make it follow the furrow. It's got a replaceable bearing that SDX didn't have. It's the exact same pure bearing that Deere uses. On the start talking about the main pin. Of course, everybody's got. You can go with OEM main pins. Needham's got main pins. We've got these from Eric's of Australia, and I'll put ours up against anybody's in terms of quality. Jackie, I don't know where Colin Lamb. There he is. They're here from Australia. Came here mostly for this event. Although I heard the geographic center of the United States was a big draw, and Cawker City, world's largest ball of twine. They're pretty excited about that too. But you're welcome to talk to them. Colin not only, these two not only manufacture and sell this stuff, but he runs a drill rebuilding business. He rebuilds what, 40 air seeders a year, more or less?
40 to 50 air seeders, ranging from like 15-foot box drills to the 60-foot air seeders.
Yeah, so 40 to 50 drills a year, anything from box drill on up to the 60-footers. So he knows his way around this. I would hazard a guess that some of that work was what resulted in some of these designs.
Yeah, that's correct. It was the OEM price was skyrocketed in Australia for parts, and so like we were talking $130 to replace a pin and 2 bushes in each opening. That was just the cost price from John Deere for the pin and bushes. So that forced us to come up with something else, for another option for the farmers, and that's how we come up with most of our products. Just trying to get a better option and something that may last a bit longer as well.
Yeah, so their Deere's is steel on steel. The Eric's has a Teflon layer inside this steel bushing, and it makes for a lot smoother ride, and it's not going to corrode. They'll last at least as long as OEM, sometimes significantly longer. And the price is very good on them. We're well under OEM. So, you know, buy whatever you want, but there's the facts. While we're on the subject of bushings, firming and closing. Eric's also has these. These are, the bushings are Teflon fibers that are wound continuously around here. Makes for a very durable and a silky smooth action. They're just really smooth. And if you compare this to some of the competitors, the clearance is a lot tighter. You've got less wobble here than you do with the competitors. And you know, while it's not hugely important, why would you want to start out with more wobble than you have to? They've got this seal on here, so the biggest problem is keeping all these pivot areas free and moving on these drills. It's a huge headache, and you're either greasing them all the time or do something else, and this seal eliminates all greasing of those, which most of you would gladly pay few dollars to get rid of that greasing chore in there. They're sealed up better, so they're going to last longer to keep all that dirt out. The seal idea has caught on, and so now the new Deere Pro Series openers have that seal in there. In fact, they've even got a dust cover over the one end, so they don't even have to worry about it. It's just the other seal end. So that's one nice thing about the Pro Series opener. They did listen, you know, they did do some homework and got a few things improved. They also, the wear point on these boots, we need to talk about that on the boots. The wear point, as with the planter, the flatter your trajectory of seed, the more likely it is just to go shooting out who knows where. And you've got more sidewall falling in there. I would love to have that seed shooting in this direction instead of this direction, which is what the Case P500 does, and that's what the old Flexicoil FSO did. You're angling the seed into the direction of travel, so your drop is, 4 or 5 inches farther forward. I mean, vastly improved precision placement. So the worst thing with this, I mean, it's already at a bad angle, being about 45 degrees from vertical. making it even worse is if this attachment point in here gets some slop in it. In fact, they're sloppy when they're new, more sloppy than they need to be. So this boot starts dragging out of position. It's getting even more horizontal. You're shooting seeds farther back. They're just going everywhere. This gap under the boot has gotten bigger. You know, you've got seeds everywhere if you fail to pay attention to that attachment point. Some people with brand new 90 series drills, they would go in and they would drill out that hole slightly and put a metric bolt in there to take up some of that slop. And you don't want to eliminate all the slop, which there's a product, Pro Stitch has a boot stabilizer. This thing can be pretty disastrous in terms of plugging because it's pushing down up here and it tends to cock that boot a little bit, so you get a little bit of a gap down here at the lower front edge. That's disastrous. There'll be enough straw get funneled down in there and want to stay in there and clean out that you're plugged. I mean, I had one guy put 48, I told him, just put one row on or two. He put them in all 48 rows. And talked to him a little bit later, and he's like, it plugged in a couple hundred feet. I called the company, and you know, they're like, take down pressure off, and we giggle. Like, yeah, right, that's going to help. So basically, all those had to come off, and so this area, we had the problem also with some short line boots. Various companies were making these boots. Their foundries were not accurate enough. They were getting too much warpage here, and so this boot wouldn't lay up flush down in this area. Right up here maybe isn't so critical, but this area down here has to lay up flush. Really kind of all along through there. If you have a little gap up here, this starts funneling straw down in here. There will be a little gap down here because that blade flexes and unflexes, so you'll have a little curvature of the boot eventually. There'll be a slight gap there, but the more gap you have there, the more trouble you're going to have. So the Deere boots are fine, Needham boots are fine, Eric's boots are fine, they all fit up good and tight. Now, to fix this slop up in the holes, we had for a while, everybody, and these are still on the market, you were drilling these holes out in the arms. You know, it not only wore the hole in the boot sloppy, it wore the arm where this attaches to. It wore that out. So you're drilling those out, putting sleeves in there, trying to get it just right. If you didn't have a drill bit guide, it wouldn't be right. There's just, I mean, you could create real disasters with even good boots. It wouldn't set up flush because your holes weren't exactly right. But there is another way to fix that. Instead of relying on this hole being perfect and the bolt through there and having all the rotation of this boot as it comes away from there, having that rotating on the bolt, you can clamp the bolt tight against the ears, which solves all your alignment problems, and then the boot rotates on the bushing or the bolt, whatever's clamped tight. Now, Needham's system uses 2 bushings on a bolt, so you clamp those bushings tight against the opener ears, and his boots have a little larger hole here, and it rides on that bushing. So it solves all the alignment problems and basically makes it so that the parts that wear are on the boot, not on the opener arm anymore. The Eric's boot system does the same thing, except it uses a shoulder bolt instead of 2 bushings. It's maybe a little bit nicer to work with to install, but otherwise it does exactly the same thing. I will tell you, if you're using the Needham bolts, use some Loctite on those because they tend to want to come loose, and then it's back to turning in the wrong area and getting slop in it again. Any questions so far? Everybody's got lunch on their mind. Yeah.
I have one going back to the firming wheel. How come on the planter a keep firmer with the mojo wire is good enough to press the seat down? But here we have to use a wheel.
All right, the question was, why on a planter can we use a Keaton and a mojo, and here we have to use a wheel? The answer is parallel link. planter has a parallel length, the opener goes up and down, it's not changing angle. This all rotates around that big pin there. So as it goes up and down, it's doing this. So that boot back here is doing all kinds of crazy things. The whole opener is changing angles down here. So your Keaton, whatever it's fastened to, the boot, the subframe of the opener itself, it's doing this. So that opener moves a little bit, and all of a sudden, oh, zero pressure on the Keaton. Back down, all right, pressure again. It's just completely unworkable. Now on the Case Precision 500, it has a parallel length. We can use a Keaton and a Mojo there. But always, you know, a firming wheel is better. I'd love to have a firming wheel on the planter. It gets to be, you know, we've developed one, we've just never marketed it because people don't want it. It makes the planter wider and they can't fold it up and get it down the bridges and get it in their shop and all that. You got to move the closing wheels rearward, and you know, there's just so many people that wouldn't want it. The firming wheel is just far less headache than Keatons and Mojos. They're more robust. You can leave them unattended for years at a time, whereas Keaton and Mojo is pretty much you usually have to replace the Keaton portion every year. You still replace Keatons twice a year? Tom replaces Keatons twice a year. You're a 24 road now. But he's meticulous.
I put I want as much pressure, like you. I want as much pressure as I can get.
Yeah.
And I run these maxed also.
Yeah.
On my drill. I run these maxed out on the seat firming wheel. They're in the maxed out position.
Ken's got them in the medium position here, but I agree. All the drills, if I'm adjusting the drill, that puppy goes into the max setting right away, and we basically never take it off. No. I want as much firming as possible. Totally agree with that. Furrow closing. Deere had that big smooth cast wheel with beveled cast. They might do some good if they stayed on the ground, but they're so busy hopping and airborne half the time in the field that, you know, they're either doing nothing or they come smashing down like a hammer, and then nothing wants to come up there either. So they're kind of a joke. The faster you drive, you know, the more they hop. Not a good situation. So we've got, as with about all the manufacturers for the planter, also have wheels, spoke closing wheels for the drill. And there's one more. There's the Needham Crumbler wheel. I thought I had one. Everybody know what that is? It's pretty thick plate. They don't even recommend them on the planter. But on the drill, they're way better than the smooth cast. Absolutely no doubt. And if it's they bounce more than the Thompson wheel. The Thompson wheel's lighter and it penetrates more easily. The thickness of the Crumbler wheel, it does a little more hopping.
Would I be right if I said that? And this is more of a question. With the Thompsons on there, I noticed I felt like I could drive a little faster. I always used to plan it 4.5 to 5. 5 was kind of a golden number. But since with all hydraulic down pressure and the Thompsons, would you feel good about running 6.5 or 7? Increase your speed?
Yeah, you can definitely increase your ground speed. And the biggest thing is the hydraulic downforce. And you're keeping before it was just so touch and go, everything's wanting to ride up and so forth. With hydraulic downforce, you can easily, you know, go a mile an hour faster or even 2. But yeah, keeping the closing wheels from bouncing, that also goes along with it. So.
What's your thoughts on copperheads?
Yeah, my question was thoughts on copperhead drill cruisers, they call them, which is basically kind of the same shape as what they've got on the planter, but they're cast metal, right? Yeah. I think they're too heavy and too thick. They're going to ride on top more and bounce more. I don't think it's as good a solution as the Thompson wheel. And now Deere on their Pro Series, I'm sure they did a focus group and all their customers told them, well, you know, get rid of your stupid bevel cast wheels, we want a spoke closing wheel. So Deere kind of listened. I think somewhere on here we've got one of their new Pro notched wheel. I really wouldn't call it a spoke. It's kind of spoked. Here it is. So I saw that and I was like, well, that's a joke. It may be slightly better than what they had before, but it's so thick and heavy, it's going to cause a tremendous amount of packing. Your seeds are not going to come up well. It's going to bounce, maybe not as bad as the other one, but it's still going to bounce. I guarantee you the reason this wheel looks the way it does, two things with Deere. They want to make sure it still works in tillage, just dandy, because you know they sell discs, high horsepower tractors. They think you need to till it up every now and then. And the other thing is, this thing is cheap to make. It's cast. That part is incredibly cheap to make. Deere's always looking out for itself. They don't necessarily care how well it works, as long as it's cheap to make and they can claim it's better and they'll sell it to you. So I have not actually seen these run in the field. We're going to run this here in a little bit, but I can't see, knowing what I know about wheel thickness and weight, why would you ever want that? It's like some of their other things on their Pro openers. You know, half of them I don't want. There's a few things that are nice, but not all. There's nothing so great about a Pro opener that you need to go trade off your 60 or 90 series. It's not going to place the seed any different. If you like that Pro Series boot, it'll fit on a 90 series drill. No problem. No, Pro Series boot won't fit on a 50 series. 50 series seed boots were well designed. 50s were good, 60s were a disaster, 90s they moved all the geometry back to where it was with the 50 series. But they changed the attachment point to be wider up there, which is probably good for wear. So those are not interchangeable. 50 series boots don't interchange with anything else. 50 series is a good drill. There's actually one thing about a 50 series that's better than all the others, and that's they changed the rock shaft and things so where the 50 series opener, it runs more rolled under, so that seed drop is more vertical on a 50 series compared to all these others. And they changed it to get more ground clearance, and I don't know, maybe they didn't really understand what the drill did, but you know, I can still make a 50 series outperform the latest and greatest Pro Series with a few attachments. Everything. So I wouldn't get rid of your 50 series unless you're just tired of fixing the frame or whatever. On this drill, as far as cutting the furrow, well, we've got row cleaners on planters. Why not row cleaners on drills? So out here on the outboard side, we've got an Eric's row cleaner, and the Australian farmers love them, and Canadian farmers love them, where they can't necessarily wait. They may have somewhat loose soil conditions, muddy. They have limited number of hours. The straw is damp, this and that. Really heavy straw, and you're just, even on the driest day, you have trouble with it, and you certainly can't run if it's damp like today. Well, a row cleaner fixes that. And this is certainly not the first row cleaner to be stuck on these drills. Yetter had one for a while. I think there is another one. But this one is certainly more robust than the Yetter. It's the only one that fits the box drills. Yetter's doesn't do that. And we outfitted them with shark tooth wheels. Colin had his own design. I told him I didn't like it very well, and we put shark tooth wheels on. This has a, this is not fully installed. There's a lift cable here so that when you lift, this isn't down there dragging on the ground. There's also an easy lock up where you don't want it, you just pin it up pretty quickly. There are times agronomically when getting some of that straw out of the way is a nice thing. It seems like even when conditions are good, you still get a bit of hairpinning with these. You know, corn or milo stalks, you're drilling beans, really heavy cover crop rye. There's times where we get a little bit of hairpinning and it'd be nice to move some out of the road. The problem is, you don't want to move too much or you're going to create erosion problems. So, it's a delicate dance. So, now where do we position these? Position them up north, and maybe if you've got some sugar sand that you can just never cut very well because the sand's so loose you can't get the blade to cut, well, just move the straw out of the way so you don't have to cut it. I think those are the places where these really shine. I'm still thinking that there's some advantages to these, even in Kansas, you know, rather than way up north. I still like what they'll do, but the need for them isn't quite as dramatic. But you know, if you're still running sickle heads for wheat, you have a lot more reason to own them than if you're running shell board. So
Does
these are incredible.
does it move any residue over to what the front rank has planted?
No, even on 7.5-inch rows, they don't move so much that it covers the other rank.
How wide the spot does it clear then?
Oh, just enough for the gauge wheel, more or less.
Just 4 inches?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. We've been working on the road plan for about 10 years, and this is our heaviest duty one that we've developed 4 years ago. This is about 4 or 5 years in the field. Now they cut off right next to the disc and throw that residue like a spray, like a flick it out. Don't just roll it over like a windrow. They'll sort of flick it out. And it cuts off close to the disc so you don't disturb the ground near the gauge wheel. If you get too much disturbance on the gauge wheel side, then it'll mud up. So, and they clear a small path. They may not clear 100% of it. You're not looking to clear 100%. You don't want to see a bare strip. But just tickle those fingers or the shark tooth wheel across the top of the surface, like Matt suggested before, and you'll see a lot of chaffy straw and stuff flicking out of the road, and it might remove 80% of the bulk load from the disc. That'll give the disc a lot better performance to do its job and cut and place the seed where it needs to be against the soil and not hairpinned against all the, we call it the chaff that comes out the back of the header. In Australia, like we would run them in a situation like this. Today's probably a perfect day because the ground's soft, there's a lot of straw on the ground, and if you had those header rows with that mat of carpet that you're trying to sow through, it just doesn't seem to happen. Even the sharp discs tend to just push a lot of that stuff into the soft ground. Hard ground's a different story.
So it could help in heavy soybean residue. We're having trouble seeding wheat into heavy soybean residue, you know, within a few days of harvest.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, look, I'm not an agronomist and I'm a 4th generation farmer, but we didn't have these in Australia 20 years ago when I left the farm and started engineering. And yeah, so agronomy questions, I can't answer them. I'll ask them to Matt. But I've seen these work in cereal stubbles, and we've had machines that have had half the residues managers locked up, half working, and they'll go backwards and forwards and sow the crop. And we'll come back, you know, a month or two later, and it looks like a football jumper. You got
Coat.
Yeah, a coat, a stripy coat. You can see where the residue managers have been to the rows that had the fight and half hairpinned, and I'm not sure where all that seed goes, but it disappears somewhere and doesn't grow. But people are still getting their good square metre rates thereafter. I think in our country they took like 170 plants per square metre for wheat. When we measured the rows that were done with the row cleaners, there was like double the plant count. It was just ridiculous. So we thought, well, in that case, there's a lot of seed getting lost out there somewhere. You could wind back that seed rate, and I can't quite recall what they were putting out, but you could wind, 30-40% of that seed rate back, or easy 25 to be on the safe side, and actually put the seed where it has to go. They're a low maintenance unit at the moment. They're completely non-greasable. The bearing in the disc hub is the same size bearing that's inside the John Deere disc hub. It's quite a robust bearing. They have twin pivot bushes that are non-greasing. They're a Teflon line pivot bush. So basically it doesn't require any maintenance. The first year or so we built some of these things, they had grease nipples and things on them, and that was we soon worked out no one greases too much, it's just a nightmare. So, and big heavy bearing solves all your problems out the front. So, and yeah, as Matt said, there should be a stainless steel cable that attaches onto here. There's a single bracket that will bolt onto the underside of this frame. It's got a built-in position on the bracket. Just put the bracket there, drill and tap one hole for a 3/8 or a 10mm bolt, and screw that bracket on, and it's done. It sounds like a big job, screwing and tapping one bolt hole per unit, but it's fairly quick really. And once that bracket's on, it'll stay there. And that was the start of our business really. Like engineering for 20 years, the last 10 years have been working on the John Deere road cleaners, the Arix road cleaners, and the John Deere discs. And the Arix wheel led us to the other issues that farmers were having with seized bushes, seized axles, worn out pins. And about 4 years ago we now work 100% solely just with John Deere disc seeders and no other outside work.
I think that covers the road cleaners. Yeah, it's an incredibly robust unit. I mean, even the earlier ones that were not all castings like this. There's some people in Canada that have run them for 50,000 acres in 10 years. So it's never given any trouble. So, one thing about it, and corn stalks, they may cause trouble, especially tall corn stalks. You get things spearing in here in different directions, and they're going to want a bridge in front of this. So we hear from our Canadian friends, just don't run them in corn stalks, you got to pin them up. We've since talked to somebody who ran them and got along fine. Certainly a 10-inch spacing or 15 is going to be a whole lot easier than 7.5. Even so, my recommendation is don't buy more than a couple of rows and run them several years in corn stalks before you if that's your primary seed bed. I can't guarantee they're not going to cause issues. So, a couple of things on air delivery real quick, and then we'll run this puppy. The dealers set these up, and the guys that set them up, they don't think this matters, but these sags, these droops in the hoses are a problem, because then the seed and fertilizer wants to puddle up where it has to go back uphill, and you'll restrict that opening, and then it'll surge. So some of that clumpiness and surging out in your fields, you can eliminate that by making these secondaries nice and straight and tight. Now, when you do that, get your openers in the max down position. Run these up, these transport wheels up on blocks. Rotate that opener all the way down where it's max it'll ever be, and then make your secondary that length. And then if you've got droops or something somewhere, tie it up, do whatever it takes, avoid these droops and sags. It's easier to do all that if you just move this tower higher. There's no reason it has to be this low. Everything works so much better if this thing is farther up in the air. You've got more vertical, less likely to see all these sags. That's a bad deal. So this whole thing can be moved upward. We've got some replacement parts for those. The riser pipe from Small Air of Australia. It's a higher quality product than OEM, so if you're to the point of needing to rebuild those, you might have a look at that. Diffusing air on an air drill. Now, all these guys that have experience with both box drills and air drills, they will tell you that they've never been able to make the air drill place seed as good as the box drill. And it's because of the air delivery. All this convenience of air delivery, well, now that seed's got all this velocity on it, this air is trying to escape from under the boot, and it carries seed with it. The lighter the seed, the more it goes. So everybody has these secondary diffusers, which go in these lines. This is a Needham one. It was actually, the original design was Dutch, and then Needham borrowed it. There's a deflector plate in there, which isn't so good for dicot seeds. It wants to split soybeans, and peas are really bad. You can get them made without the little deflector plate in there, and they still do the same thing. These might be the most trouble-free ones out there. Eventually, you can have some issues with these plugging, but usually they keep on running. Everybody is trying to improve on that. They're trying to slow the seed with a spiral. We've got a lot of experience with that. There's problems with the dead airspace in here. Dew and dry fertilizer dust. It wants to accumulate in the dead airspace. It was terrible on the D-cup diffusers that we had for a while. Those were a joke. The air guard eliminates that dead airspace. You get this nice spiraling, slows the seed down to where you're getting pretty close to a gravity drop. You're venting the air out here. These tuning rings change how big this spacing is. Most of the time, somewhat trouble-free, not perfectly so. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with secondary diffusers. Like, yeah, they improve seed placement. Are they a pain in the butt? Yep, they sure are. The problem with these, it's even worse than those, in that you kind of want this thing somewhat upright. You can't have it laying over on its side. None of them do well with dirty crops, like if you have oat seed with sticks in it or something like that. All that just makes it worse. So instead of doing it with the secondary diffuser, a fellow in Australia, those clever Aussies, they're diffusing the air up here at the primary. Because if you have these secondaries running straight without all the sags, you can vent a bunch of air right here and get rid of that air pressure. Yeah, so you can change all of these out in under a minute. And if anything ever goes wrong with it, you can be back to your OEM in a minute. You adjust this. There's a little baffle in there. This is just a rain cap. There's a baffle inside there that you can rotate it all the way closed or all the way open. And you just mess around. You know, if you're plugging a little bit, occasionally you just adjust it a little more open. So they're far less annoying than secondaries, and they do most of the work. The secondary is still going to be better, but here you can get fairly close to what you want without all the hassle of dealing with secondary diffusers. Now, their big thing is this conceal, where it's a knife. The gauge wheel is in two parts, and the knife is between those two halves of the gauge wheel. and does their fertilizer placement over there. Well, how much extra downforce do you think it's going to take to shove this blunt object into the soil? This is not a no-till concept. Even if I could shove it in the ground, would I want to? That's going to be causing some horrendous compaction over there. And third, no time. So you see these things, it's like, well, that's obviously conventional till, or they claim it's for no-till, but they really, everybody has some grand idea that they're going to make such and such, and it's going to work. And I've been around this 25 years. I've seen it all come and go. And the biggest thing is saying no sometimes. I was thinking about this when we were picking this stuff up. It's like, yeah, we could have become a dealer for this Y and this and the other part. We could carry that. Might make a little money selling them. If it's not going to be something that the benefit outweighs the cost, no, we're not selling it. And I do that with product development too. My scrap heap is bigger than anybody else's because I'm pretty harsh. If it isn't going to be bulletproof and be a significant advantage, there's no point putting any more junk on the market. It's just clutter. So we're pretty selective about what we carry. It's stuff that works, things that provide a significant benefit. Okay, I think that covers a couple things on the planters. Drills, normally last 4 or 5 years or so, we've always had a precision 500 drill out in the field. Sometimes it was the one painted blue, P2080. Same thing. We had a little trouble getting our hands on one this year. And so we're going to do this by slideshow instead. The difference here is this. There we go. Okay. This thing up here is your top leg. It's a parallel leg. So these openers raise and lower, rotating around this rack shaft, bringing it up and down. But this controls this whole subframe back here, so it's going straight up and down. It's not doing this arc of travel like a radial length, a swing arm length. So everything works a lot better. You figure out what angle you want on this stuff, well, you can keep it there. It's not doing all these crazy changes. They did another thing that was good, and the FSO had this also, but this blade is perfectly straight up and down. The Deeres are tilted out at the top towards the gauge wheel side. This is really rather useless. I think some engineer way back when thought, well, it's a half planter opener, the planter is tilted that way, we've got to make the drill the same way. Well, the reason the planter blade is tilted like that is to have room for the seed tube in the bottom of the seed metering mechanism. There's nothing inherently good about it. Why would you want the furrow extra wide at the top? It's the part down at the bottom that you care about being wide enough. Making it wider at the top, that it's just causing more compaction. It takes more downforce to hold it in the ground. And we do see that on the Deere drills. These precision 500s take significantly less downforce to hold them in the ground. They cut better. They don't pack the sidewall as much. All these things are really nice. I like, they're headed in the right direction on so many things here. I mean, it's robust. It's easy to change depth. They were almost there. They didn't put a seed lock wheel on it. And even worse, they didn't leave any room for anybody else to put one in there. They could just as easily have spread those ranks out a little bit, poured out, put a socket in here where you could add a firming wheel if you wanted. No, they didn't do that. They're so sure that they were right, that nobody needed this, that they built it this way, and now they're stuck with it. So, they've got, instead, they're trying to do firming and closing with this ridiculously wide packer wheel. They've tried everything. You can change the angle and do all this stuff. And they've tried different ones back here. None of them were worth a damn. And that's not really all that surprising. I could have told them that. So to fix that, both Phil Needham and I have created brackets. His is a little angle changer and a little axle in here that allows you to put on a spoke closing wheel and create toe out, because this thing doesn't run with any toe out right now. Ours is a little different. We're replacing, we make a little piece that slides over that shaft and bolts on there to create our toe out and run on top of the wheel. But in order to be able to run a spoke closing wheel, you've got to do something about your lack of seat firming. So we make a bracket that holds a Keaton and Mojo on there. It's kind of a special little Keaton. It's actually designed for Great Plains planter. And we modify it a little bit, and I got a little bracket to hold that down there. We've got a special Mojo wire. Here it is. To install that. So here's how it attaches. Is it as good as a C-block wheel? No, I never claimed it would be. I can't get that much pressure out of it. But as long as you've got pretty good moisture, it does a nice job. But if you're in just desperately dry conditions, just barely getting the moisture anyway, and you need that seat stomped in really good, I can't get enough out of a Keaton. The other problem is, well, Keatons wear out. You cover any acres with this drill, you've worn out your Keatons every year. Now, I know people that have put our system, several of them, they've got 60-foot drills, and they've put, let's see, those 10-inch drills? I think they're 10 inch. Did they put 96 on or 76? Anyway, yeah. So they put 96 rows of ours on there. Actually, they, Case IH sometimes will pay for our upgrade because they know they've got a problem. People won't buy it without the upgrade. So in some cases, that's how that came about. And I asked him, how troublesome are these? I mean, that's kind of a big pain in the butt to be changing those all the time. And he's like, no, not really. We just keep a bunch of spares, and every morning you find a few that are kind of loose, and you put them on there. Sound like fun to me. It sounds like a real hassle. But if you're willing to put up with all that, you can do a better job placing seed with a P500, provided you don't need maximum firming. But the seed placement is really, really good. And part of it's that seed tube is angled forward and the boot is way up there. The boot is narrow, it comes down farther into the furrow. Truly, you're getting within 95% of planter accuracy with this opener. It's really getting close most of the time. But for most of us, dealing with 48 or 96 rows of Keatons and Mojos, you're going to lose your hair. Just run a Deere drill. It's not as good, but at least the maintenance is bad enough on those. We've got this. If you want to go the extra mile, you want that extra good seed placement, you can do it with the P500. Because of that parallel length, P500 also functions better in terraces and in all kinds of terrain. Cutting ability is really nice. So, any questions on that or anything else I've said? All right. You've been a great audience. Thanks for all the questions. You reminded me of all the things I forget